guy gets it.
Already the right attitude. We're not going to mess around. We're going to get him up. There's a lot of you that want to see him. So everybody, just make him feel as welcome as you can. Everybody.
Start your round of applause now.
Ian McDiarmid's here.
Hi. Welcome to the dark side.
You can pick, it's entirely up to you. You get the sofa, I'll go a wing Mac. Welcome, Ian, welcome.
Thank you, good to be here.
How are you doing?
Pretty good.
How's Brussels treating you?
Brussels treating me very well. It's nice to come to a great town in Europe and assert my Europeanism.
Yes.
Yes, some of us from the UK apologise profusely.
Yeah.
Let's hear that said. I assume this isn't your first time in Brussels?
No, I came here many years ago when I was very young. It's very nice to be back. We had a great meal last night and a wander around the city. I wish I could be here for a bit longer, but so far so great.
Oh, good. Yeah, the food will keep me anywhere, and
Yeah,
it is brilliant here. I assume, bit of a busy year, has it been, Ian?
It has, yes, and I've been in charge of a secret for over 2 years. Because when J.J. Abrams called up and said, we're thinking of bringing him back, I said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, you know, it's my task to sort of bind those whole 9 movies together with the final one of this particular series, and we didn't really feel we could do it without the Emperor. What do you think? So I said, oh, well, I'll think about it. And then I came up with the word yes, when do we start? So it was a big surprise to me. It was a big surprise to a lot of other people as well, because I thought I was well and truly dead, as George Lucas had very satisfactorily killed me at the end of Return of the Jedi. But I wasn't, of course. I was very severely injured, physically debilitated and battered, but the mind was as keen and as sharp and as dark as ever.
Yeah, please, if you've got that in you, let it
Fans
go.
of the dark side in.
Interestingly, when you say that, I imagine that's happened to you twice, though, because
Yes.
you got the death out of the way early.
You're absolutely right. My whole Star Wars experience, I mean, when JJ called me, that was really sort of not so much third time lucky as lucky for the third time. Because when I was first, all those years ago in Return of the Jedi, when I was, of course, quite old, not as me, but as the Emperor, I just turned up one lunchtime. George had asked to see me through my agent, and before I knew where I was the Emperor of the Universe. And then a few years later, another call from George. I went to meet him, and he said, oh, well, this guy has a history. And then I was Senator Palpatine, and then Chancellor Palpatine, and then back to good old Mr. Evil again. And then I was resurrected for the purposes of Episode 9. So it was a wonderful experience, really, to be surprised, really surprised, for 3 times in my life. Lucky me.
I don't think there's ever been a character that I can think of in film history where an actor has to learn a character, then instead of allowing the character to evolve, to reverse engineer the evolution of the character,
Yes.
and then relearn the original and then evolve it from there.
Exactly. It was like being sort of shaken up like a kaleidoscope, you know, and just to see where the pieces landed. But coming back to do it for the last time, which I think means the last time, it was rather alarming to me how little he'd gone away. I was able to call on him almost immediately. And of course, my voice, you probably notice now, has got a bit deeper now that I'm a little older than I was when I started this whole thing. So I didn't have to sort of do voice exercises to get it down there, because I found it was all too immediately accessible to me. So tapping into the dark side with 2 years' notice was easier to do than I imagined. But I suppose the most difficult thing of all was to keep it a secret, because I couldn't tell anybody.
Yeah, I mean
anybody. Yeah.
Because the reveal as well was the laugh.
Yes.
And that's how iconic that character is.
Yes, and they were very clever. I think it was JJ's idea, and Disney too, of course, that they would reveal the fact that I was in it slowly. I thought I was going to have to keep the secret until I attended the LA premiere all of that time. And I had this line prepared, but people say, "What are you doing here?" And I was going to say, "Well, I've just shown up to see if I'm in it." I said that anyway, you know, because you never know what happens on the cutting room floor. Anyway, I was happy to see that I was still in it. But it was a great experience, and working with an equally wonderful director couldn't be more different, but just as imaginative and as talented. So that was a whole new take on it. I had a really good time. Lucky me.
Did you ever have much of an input into the character itself, or?
Well, the character himself sort of exists, and JJ, when we met in London, secretly, of course, the 2 years before we
in a
started.
restaurant back to back.
Well, yes, you see, we
Yeah,
couldn't do the lunch in a restaurant.
Yeah.
In fact, we met at the casting director's home, which was very funny. Nina Gold, marvelous casting director of Star Wars and many other things, Game of Thrones, etc., etc. And I know her a bit, so the idea was I turned up to meet JJ for the first time, to meet Kathleen Kennedy once again, and Michel Helwan, the other producer. And so I turned up, and Nina came to the door, and she said, "Oh, JJ's here already. He's just having a conversation with my son." And then she went, "Oh my God, I've got to show you into another room, because my son is the worst person in the world at keeping a secret." So that was the beginning of my jailed experience. It was quite a pleasant room, actually, with books. Shut away in this room until the other two arrived. And then I got in, and JG told me the story of the movie. I mean, in great detail. In fact, by the time he'd finished, I felt I'd seen the movie. It was so good. And what he said was very exciting. And by and large, what you ended up seeing. Of course, there were differences along the way, as there are in all films, but that's exciting too. On the set with JJ, it's always exciting, and it's usually very funny between takes. And as he'd written it, with Chris Terrio, he was always, he would say, improving the script as he went along. So it was always exciting, because you never really knew what was going to happen next. That was not unlike the experience with George, because George's scripts were very precise and very rarely changed. I suppose that was a lot to do with the fact that he knew at certain points in the dialogue there would be digital cues, CGI cues, that had to be adhered to. But this film, as I'm sure you know, and indeed episode, where are we now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, was shot on film with the CGI stuff added later. So that was a different experience.
I found that fascinating that they shot on film as well. It's so rare now.
I know, I was so surprised. And on the prequels, we were surrounded by these giant screens with a lot of people who came along to watch. It's a bit like theatres now and again. But to go back to film, and I think they sort of said it for a half joke, because people don't tend to say, check the gate now and again, you know, to see if there are any hairs inside it. But they did. Because it was all on film, and there were just small video screens around the studio that could be moved. So there was no big video village, which was less of a pressure, actually, than usual. But I was surprised by that. In this enormous studio with tiny little television sets.
On that, because I'm fascinated with how it was put together, because it was on film, did that mean it was the old way of working, like less takes, less sort of, because film obviously costs a lot of money. Was it new cameras, old cameras?
It was film cameras. They looked pretty modern to me, and there were usually about at least 3, sometimes 4, maybe occasionally 5 cameras on the set, on the shot at a particular time. But that gave JJ lots of flexibility. What's good about him too, all the individual cameramen had their own input. They might have an idea,
amazing.
and he would listen and really by and large, if anyone had a strong notion, he'd incorporate it. And that was true of the actors as well.
It is the most beautifully shot Star Wars I think I've ever seen.
I'm glad you said that. I think it's an odd thing to say about Star Wars, but it's a very beautiful film.
There are moments where it feels like it's been lifted from the concept art straight onto the screen, and all that depth added in. There's so many shots where you could freeze it and you're like, I'd have that on my wall. Like, it is absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
Like, every frame.
And your face helped with that.
Yes, my face. I wondered what face was going to come back.
You mentioned that at one point when you were with the screens, it was a lot of people watching, and it felt like you were in a theatre again. Because you have an extensive stage background. What got you into acting in the first place?
Oh, that goes way back. I don't know. I think when I was 10 years old, one day I sort of woke up and realized I was an actor. That was an odd thing, because the school I was at, they were doing this sort of mime of the great Australian, I beg their pardon, song, Waltzing Matilda, and that's about a tramp who dives into, I won't go into details.
Hey, that's one of our most famous tramps, thank you very much.
That's right. Anyway, they were casting the tramp, in my class, and I was quite a shy individual, and they said, okay, anybody wants to try for this, put your hand up. And I found that independently, my hand had gone up before it had gone through my brain. And anyway, I got the part. And so I think that's when I sort of thought, well, whatever this thing is that acting is, I think I've got it inside me, and maybe one day I'll get the chance to do it professionally.
It is incredible. Like, do you now, looking at the legacy that you've got with things like Star Wars, and obviously your career, like you say, is so extensive, is it strange now to look back and go, I never imagined that progression, or is it something that you felt just, you always steered it towards something?
I can't think of an actor who wouldn't be astonished by the progress, or indeed otherwise, that his career has taken. Because one thing, amazingly, doesn't lead to another, unless you happen to be in 9 Star Wars movies. So it's, no, of course. I mean, the idea that I should be in Star Wars all those years ago is as strange to me as I imagine it would be to any of you, And I still have to sort of shake my head about it. Here I am with this microphone, having done those movies, talking to you. Because it's not just any film, is it, or any saga. It's the one that started it all.
Exactly, but it's not just that. The character specifically you play, you can't escape that image. That image is everywhere. Like, that image is, if there's a politician who is seen as being a bit wrong or a bit corrupt, there's suddenly like your face compared to them and something like that. Is that a strange thing to have?
Yeah, sometimes it's very satisfying, actually. I shouldn't get into details, but the Sunday Times a few weeks back, before we left the European Union, had a picture of Boris Johnson as me. And his associate, mentor, whatever, is a rather sinister figure called Dominic Cummings. He was Darth Vader. And Jeremy Corbyn was Obi-Wan Kenobi. I didn't quite get that one, actually. And there were a few other characters, but it was very clever. But yes, to use the emperor, the mad, authoritarian, evil genius, to represent various authoritarian figures around the world, I don't think George Lucas would mind that at all. And also, those of you, and I'm sure it's everybody here, who know the progression of this character throughout the movie, I mean, he used the tropes, the byways, the highways of democracy, which he was always in favor of, to make himself the most powerful person in the history of the universe. And that's still what they try.
It is because your character, the beautiful thing about Star Wars and the characters, there is a lot of shades of grey, like Darth Vader, obviously, the redemption and stuff like that. But your character, your agenda, your sort of resolution is always, I am evil.
That's
and
right.
I am going to very secretly rise to where I'm basically a god. It's incredible, because no other character has that.
Yes, he was from birth. I don't even want to think about how that happened. He was an authoritarian narcissist, but we can put that phrase to good use in our contemporary universe now.
Before we open it up to the audience, you say from birth and you say the character won't come back again. I'm saying Baby Palpatine, though.
Oh, I'd watch
Baby.
Baby Palpatine.
Yes,
There's Baby Yoda, that's Baby Palpatine.
Yeah, he would be really cute, wouldn't he?
Yeah. Would you voice Baby Palpatine?
Palpy. I can't imagine that. I saw at the premiere in LA, I bumped into my old friend Frank Oz, who you know, and I said, "Congratulations on your baby." And he gave me a strange look. And anyway, we were whisked off somewhere else. He came out to me, Ian, what did you mean about my child? I said, no, not your child, Frank. You know, Yoda's child. He went, oh, nothing to do with me.
And that's when he showed you a model of Baby Palpatine.
I didn't believe him, of course, you know, but you know, people's private lives should be kept private, in my view.
I have to ask this now that you've said people's private life, but I did notice, am I correct in saying that you're from Carnoustie?
That's correct.
Because I've got family in Carnoustie.
Have you really?
Yeah, and I wanted to know, it's just near Dundee in Scotland, and I just wanted to know, Dundee or Dundee United?
Oh, I was never a football fan.
Correct.
I wouldn't dream of choosing one at the expense of the other. But it's true, I was born in Carnoustie, but then brought up in Dundee, so that's that side of the Scottish coast, and I've sort of gone back there, not to either of those places, but on the edge of the sea. And actually, if anyone has ever been or is coming to the east coast of Scotland, you'll notice the rocks there are very like the rocks in in Exegol, the Emperor's terrible underworld cavern in episode 9. And at one point, I think it occurred to him he might come up to that part of the world to do a bit of filming. But his throne, wonderful throne based on the original Ralph McQuarrie design, looks as if it's made out of good, hard, black Scottish granite. It isn't. It's made out of polystyrene.
There's a point on set where you went up to him and I'm home, and everyone's like, oh, he's back on set, he's living here, but you're like, I'm back in Scotland.
Yeah, yes, exactly. That was the poignancy personified.
Lovely. We want you guys to ask questions, so if you have a question, raise your hand. We will get out to you, don't be shy. We've got 1, 2, yeah.
Hello, and welcome to Belgium.
Hi.
I was wondering about cloning the Emperor, because some of us were already familiar with that from some of the comics, but did you know that this idea existed, and how did you feel about it, and how did you incorporate it in playing the character?
Did I know what existed?
The cloning thing.
The cloning thing. Yes. Well, of course, there were all sorts of explanations for why I might return, but it's interesting. I think I can reveal something. At one point, the script had the line in that first scene with Adam when he says, "You're a clone," and I said in that original script, which is no longer with us, more than a clone, less than a man. Which seemed to me to sum him up, really, because we knew that, well, the camera has already snaked past the clone tank, in which there are various versions of Snoke that you probably noticed. Spin it back and have a look. Well, you can't yet, can you? But you'll be able to once it's on Disney Plus, I think, not too far distant future. So Snoke was a clone. He did. Palpatine was responsible for everything. He made everything in one way or another. And that's, talk about power early on. If you think back from, when I'm sure you will, go back to watch them in the correct sequence, that's threaded throughout all of the movies, is this sense of evil. And in a sense, when everyone commits a bad act, it's because of this character's influence, either in public or pervasively in private, or apparently dead. So that's power.
Just on that point.
I just like that as a sitcom. That's power.
With that, because your character, obviously, they had to give a sense of what you've been doing in that time between.
Yes.
Did they give you a backstory that you had there but we didn't see?
It's so interesting because neither JJ nor George Lucas have really concerned themselves with the backstory of this character. I didn't mind because I could have my own ideas. And originally, when we were doing the makeup tests and so on, well, for a start, I had my own eyes. They were removed a little later. They were removed digitally in order to return with real contact lenses when I got back to the guy you saw at the end of Return of the Jedi. But in the original script, there was much more physical detail, pretty horrific physical detail, which I wasn't surprised sort of went as the scripts evolved. But I think, see, originally, JJ perhaps felt that we had to explain, how he was physically treated when Vader chucked him down that shaft. And then after a while, we thought, well, I don't think that needs to be over-explained. You'll see that terrible face, and you'll see he's in a contraption, some kind of support machine, a little advanced on the contemporary wheelchair, and that will probably say all we need to say. And the whole process of making a film, anyway, is about paring away, pulling back to what you really need to get to the essentials. So that was the progression. But as far as thinking what happened previously, that mind kept alive somehow. I don't know, you probably noticed a few tubes coming out of his body early on. And also he was able to be as commanding, obviously, as he had been, because look at that army.
Yeah.
He made that. But the thing, and the most frustrating thing for him at the beginning of the movie, is he can't get back to his old self. He doesn't have complete physical control over his own body, and presumably not his fantastic power with his fingers. So his progress in the film is to get himself back to being, I won't use the word human, but emperor again, which eventually he does, as you know, through very complicated routes.
Very, very good answer. I'd like to think at some point in that period, though, there'd be a great episode of Grand Designs where he's building his lair.
Oh, there must be.
Yeah.
Yes.
Kevin's in. The Emperor's got a infinite budget to build his evil lair.
Yes.
Check out this Scottish granite.
Yeah. Who had a question? Hands up. You're so many hands going up. We got 1, 2, 3. So yeah. If you guys, if there's any chance you can move forward, and we will get you in a second.
Hi.
Hi.
You have experienced so many generations making the Star Wars movies.
Sure.
Also different casts, of course. What is the biggest difference you experience? Is it in which area is it? Next to making the movie, of course.
Well, I suppose what's great is I've had the opportunity to work with so many great actors, but in a contained way. I mean, it was just. It was Mark and me, Dave Prowse in the early days. And then when I was a senator and the chancellor, I got to meet lots of other actors and do scenes with them. And in the latest movie, my scenes are with Adam and with Daisy. Also, they were let into the secret. Well, of course they were, because I turned up, at the last moment, but nobody else. And Anthony, who's around here, Daniels, didn't know. When we were out in Chicago at the anniversary of the first movie, episode 1, The Phantom Menace, Anthony said that he was, well, actually, no, to go back a little further, the trailer came on. There was my laugh, which was a previous recording, and then they thought it would be a good idea if I just appeared on stage and said, roll it again, which I did. And the only two actors who were not surprised by that, were Adam and Daisy. All of the other actors didn't know that Mr. Evil had come back. I don't know how they managed to keep it from them. But Anthony said, we knew there was a new bad guy. We didn't know it was an old one. Which was, nice to say. But it was great that they didn't. So, and apparently you can look back on that, you see their jaws drop when I come back onto the stage. And then, of course, we all went sort of quiet, and I got a bit coy in interviews and so on. because no one knew whether I was going to be in it or not, or little, or whether I was just some kind of hologram, or so on. And so the mystery went on. But it was, of course, it was great working with Adam and Daisy, you know, two wonderful actors, and with completely different approaches, both entirely valid, but with marvelous concentration. And then the first scenes I did were actually consecutive in order. It was the first scene of the movie was with Adam, and I've never seen concentration like that in another actor. Those, I mean, I know I'm supposed to be scary, but those eyes staring at you at the other side of the camera is, you know, an inspiration.
He's an ex-Marine as well, isn't he?
He's what?
I think he's an ex-Marine.
He is an ex-Marine, yes.
So that added layer of discipline as well.
Absolutely, and there's one scene, I'm sure he had many others. I mean, look at those fights, all of which are him. When I had to merely flick my fingers and throw him into the air, which I enjoyed doing immensely. All I had to stand there and hardly do anything, and of course, as you know, they add everything later. So I was just doing, it was very sort of casual, something like that,
Did you
many
have
times.
a choreographer for
and they
that,
thought,
or a coach?
I said she could have the day off. But then he was wire. He was on a big harness and wire, and every time I did that, they shot him into the air. And he's almost bounced off the big screen at the back many, many times, because you know that's what we have to do. And he came in the next day, and I said, "How are you after that?" He went, "Well, you know, bruises, but I'm a Marine."
On that, when you say the wire work and stuff, one of the things that this trilogy did, they went back to a lot of practical effects. How has the practical effects evolved from the first trilogy to how they do them now? Is it similar, or is it?
Yes. Well, again, there are so many talented people involved, and they have also their talents have evolved over the years. So the most interesting thing, which was entirely alive, was the machine I was on. I suppose you could have just had me against a lot of blue screen, a sitting position not unlike this, and added that later. But no. We tested this machine, first of all, to see that I wouldn't fall off it, or that it would kill me. And we had two different ones to begin with. One where I would have had to do everything on my knees. I mean, very carefully protected, but we all got a little bit worried about that. So they settled for one where I am completely erect the whole time and entirely strapped in. There were 4 people behind me moving the machine, then there was a health and safety guy in front. I couldn't have been better looked after. But I really did swing around that huge set in Pinewood.
How big's the machine? How high up would you?
It's a little bit, higher than me.
Oh,
I stood on this tiny platform with my feet, and then everything else was strapped in. So I had freedom obviously to move my head and my arms, but that was it. And that was helpful, because, you know, he wouldn't have freedom to move anything else. So it was that very good contributory factor to the sense of the character. But I've always wanted to fly. I mean, who doesn't? But I've always wanted to fly in a harness, or preferably on stage. But maybe that'll happen one day. But because these guys could manipulate me up, down, sideways, any which way, and fast. And I don't have vertigo. In fact, I rather enjoyed that. So that was a relief to them all. But they said, you know, anytime you've got a problem, just raise your hand, you know, and we'll lower you down. But I didn't. But it did. It scared Daisy to begin with. She thought, you can't do this to him. But that also gave me more power, you know. It's like, and of course, I had nothing to do with the manipulation. But it was great to zoom up in. You can't quite see that in the movie, but there was a lot of zooming around.
We've only got a couple of minutes.
Oh, yes.
So should we try and get a couple of these?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I can't do
that.
that.
Yeah.
Yep, here we go.
Hi.
Hi.
I was wondering, Palpatine has so many amazing scenes, and I was wondering which one was your personal favorite, character-wise.
Yes. Gentleman Last Wish is my favourite scene. I suppose it still goes back to Revenge of the Sith and the scene in the Opera House with Anakin, where he finally nails it, as it were. He faces him with the possibility of Padme's death, but also the possibility of naked power. and he falls for it. And it was terrific to do that scene with Hayden. I've talked about it a lot. We did it at the end of the day, one Friday in Australia, just suddenly, which made it, I said, it was a bit scary because, you know, we just went into it without any kind of rehearsal. But it meant that it was entirely fresh. So and also I think it's probably the longest dialogue scene, certainly the longest dialogue scene I had in the history of the movies. Because, you know, you usually zoom on to the next action sequence. So it was satisfying from that point of view. But as far as the most recent film is concerned, I suppose when I got them both in front of me, both Kylo and my granddaughter, that was a great day. Because that's the day when Palpatine realizes that he somehow has to get the power of both of them. But then realizes that all he needs really is to persuade, it's a terrific notion, it's a terrible notion, his granddaughter to hate him absolutely and to want to kill him more than anything in the world in order to reincarnate as the Empress, the most evil Sith that could ever rule the universe worse than me. That's a marvelously sick idea, I think, really. So the day we moved towards that, and that was over a few days, frankly, that was very satisfying.
It'd be an interesting Christmas of that family.
Yes, exactly, yes.
Hello, sir.
Hi.
My question for you was, what is your favorite personal quote from the Emperor?
There are a few of them, as you would imagine. I like two from the recent movie. Everybody knows about "Do It," and and that certain number that you know he commands to be done, right? Means the slaughter of the innocents. But in the recent movie, I like the first thing I said, which in the original script was not the first thing I said, but it's just the two word "at last." In other words, you know, I can get back and do all the terrible things, and now the army's bigger, and you know, implying that Kyle is a pushover, which of course is not, and so on. And the other quote from the movie that I think I like is, "I have died before."
So
You'd nice to be able to say that in real life.
As a comedian, Matt and I have said that many a time.
Yeah,
Really?
yeah,
I know. Well,
we've died on stage. So
Yeah,
so
as a stage actor, never mind stand up. Yeah. I no doubt will again. I should have it, yes.
Do you ever mess with people and slip into the voice? Like if you're at a restaurant, they go, "How are you paying?" You go, "Backhand."
No, because they would think I was completely insane. If I put the hood over my head, some of them might get it.
Also, just flick your finger and then disappear out the door.
I could guess.
Okay, we're going to take, if we've got time.
Yes.
Hi.
Hello.
There's this theory on the internet about...
Oh, is there? A theory on the internet?
Yeah.
Whatever next?
What are you
Not a
reading?
conspiracy theory, I hope.
Over the last 5 years, got bigger and bigger, about Darth Jar Jar Binks. What are your thoughts about
Oh, yeah.
whether Jar Jar might be a
Jar Jar Binks. Well, we had a very nice time, Jar Jar and I, Ahmed, Best and I, when we were celebrating, indeed we were, the first movie, The Phantom Menace. And he's a great guy, as many of you who have seen his stuff and will know him will know. And there was a very moving moment when we were invited on stage. It was Anthony Daniels, myself, Warwick Davis was in the chair, being witty and really interesting and intelligent as always. And when he introduced Ahmed as Jar Jar, the place erupted and wouldn't stop going Jar Jar, Jar Jar. So I think he felt that after all of those years of being not him personally, but the character being universally rejected, he got a little bit of warmth again. And these, of course, were people who, most of whom, I think, were seeing that film in its proper context. You know, they hadn't been through, those of us of the generation who started on episode 4, 5, and 6 and had to go backwards. And they found him interesting, refreshing, and dare I say, even funny. Ahmed, of course, is all of these things. My only regret was that because he wasn't himself, that was the whole point, he couldn't really recreate his comic genius through the terms of that particular digital character.
There's always life on Disney Plus, though. The Jar Jar spin-off.
Oh yeah, yes, exactly. I mean, what doesn't have a spin-off?
Yeah, get him in Palpy.
I know.
Yeah. Jar Jar and Palpy, that would be the...
Yes, I'd pay for that, actually. I'd buy a subscription for that. I hope they're listening.
We have been told, unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap up. Obviously, there are tons of you, but Ian's here all weekend, so please go and join that long queue, see him. There's not really anything else we have to do, but show our love for him. Ian, it's been an absolute pleasure, like absolute royalty on the stage for us.
Thank you, great to see you all.
We'll let you go.
Thanks.
Ian,
Come to the table.
Before you go, if you're okay, we've been trying to get